What if the black employee you degraded was raising a son who would take everything you inherited?
Richard Johnson stood quietly in his supervisor's office at Stellar Enterprises, his worn work boots shifting nervously on the polished floor. At 52, he'd spent 15 years as a maintenance supervisor, keeping the building systems running smoothly. But today something felt different. The air conditioning hummed overhead as Jordan Maxwell, the newly appointed CEO, looked down at Richard's employee file with obvious disdain. "You've been here." Quite a while, Jordan drawled, his expensive suit catching the morning light. At 35, he'd inherited the company from his father and seemed determined to make his mark. "But times are changing, Richard. We need a more modern approach." Richard felt his throat tighten. "Sir, my team has maintained this building's efficiency rating at 98%. We've saved the company millions in—" "Let me stop you right there," Jordan interrupted, standing to his full height. "This isn't about numbers. It's about image. When clients visit, they expect to see— well, let's just say they expect a certain type of person in management positions." The implication hung heavy in the air. Richard's hands clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice steady. "Mr. Maxwell, I've dedicated my life to this company. My son Marcus is in college studying business." Because Jordan laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Your son? In business school?" He shook his head, picking up a gold paperweight. "Look, Richard, let's be realistic. Some people are meant to lead, others to follow. Know your place." The words cut deep, but Richard thought of Marcus. Brilliant and determined, currently maintaining a 4.0 GPA at Harvard Business School. His son's future was worth more than his pride. "I understand," Sir Richard replied quietly. "What are you proposing?" Jordan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll be demoted to regular maintenance staff. Half your current salary. Take it or leave it." He turned to look out his floor to ceiling windows, adding casually, "Oh, and you'll report to the new supervisor starting Monday. Young guy, very qualified. The right fit." Richard felt the weight of 20 years of hidden slights and masked prejudices crushing down on him. His mortgage, Marcus's tuition, and his wife's medical bills, everything flashed through his mind. With steady hands, he accepted the paperwork Jordan thrust at him. As he turned to leave, Jordan called out, "Oh, and Richard, clear out your office by end of day. We need it for someone more suitable." Walking down the hallway, Richard pulled out his phone and looked at the wallpaper, a photo of Marcus at his high school graduation, valedictorian speech in hand. His son's words echoed in his mind. "Dad, one day I'll make sure no one can ever look down on us again." Little did Jordan Maxwell know his casual cruelty that day would set in motion events that would reshape both their futures in ways neither could imagine. Marcus Johnson sat in his Harvard dorm room, staring at his phone in disbelief. His father's voice, usually so strong and proud, had cracked while explaining the demotion. The late evening campus bells chimed outside as Marcus gripped his economics textbook until his knuckles turned white. "Dad, you can't let them do this to you," Marcus insisted, his free hand furiously taking notes. "Jordan Maxwell. I'm writing this name down. Son, sometimes we have to know." Marcus cut in, his voice firm. "I've watched you swallow your pride for years. I've seen the way they treat you. This ends with our generation." Richard sighed through the phone. "Marcus, focus on your studies." "Don't let this—" "I am focusing," Marcus replied, pulling up his laptop. "Did you know Stellar Enterprises stock has dropped 15% since Maxwell took over? His father built that company. But Jordan's running it on reputation alone." A moment of silence passed before Richard spoke again. "Son, promise me you won't do anything rash. Your future, my future, is exactly what I'm thinking about." Marcus said, opening his investment tracking software. He'd been trading since high school, turning his scholarship stipend into a modest portfolio. "Dad, remember when you taught me that every building needs a strong foundation? Well, every company does too." After ending the call, Marcus pulled up everything he could find about Stellar Enterprises and Jordan Maxwell. His roommate found him still awake at 3 a.m., surrounded by financial reports and market analyses. "You okay, man?" his roommate asked, yawning. Marcus looked up, his eyes gleaming with determination. "Just planning for the future." "Did you know that hostile takeovers often start with small, strategic stock acquisitions?" The next morning, Marcus walked into his advanced corporate strategy class with a new purpose. As Professor Chen discussed market dynamics, Marcus raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Johnson. Professor, what happens to a company's vulnerability when its CEO prioritizes personal prejudice over profitable leadership?" The professor smiled, intrigued. "An interesting question. Care to elaborate?" Marcus stood, commanding the attention of his classmates. "I'd like to present a case study on how unconscious bias in corporate leadership can create exploitable market weaknesses." As he laid out his analysis, several students began taking notes. Among them was Jessica Chen, the professor's daughter and a brilliant finance major, who watched Marcus with growing interest. After class, she caught up with him. "That wasn't just a theoretical question, was it?" Marcus met her gaze. "No, it wasn't. In fact, I could use someone with your expertise in Asian markets." Jessica tilted her head. "For what?" "A long-term project," Marcus replied, his father's humiliation fueling his resolve. "Something about teaching arrogant CEOs the true cost of discrimination." Jessica sat across from Marcus in the university's coffee shop, her laptop open to Stellar Enterprises' financial records. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the windows as they pored over the data. "Your analysis was right," she said, highlighting several figures. "Jordan Maxwell has made multiple questionable decisions since taking over. Employee turnover is up 40%, and they've lost 3 major international contracts." Marcus nodded, stirring his untouched coffee. "He's running the company like it's still 1950. But here's what interests me," he pointed to a chart. "Their Asian market share has dropped 65% under his leadership. My father's connections could help there," Jessica mused. "He sits on several boards in Singapore and Hong Kong." "But Marcus, what exactly are you planning?" He leaned forward, voice low but intense. "A 5-year strategy. First, we identify Maxwell's weaknesses, his pride, his prejudices, and his poor business acumen. Then we exploit them, piece by piece." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a complete takeover." "I'm talking about justice," Marcus replied, pulling up his own portfolio. "I've already started buying shares through different shell accounts. Small amounts, nothing suspicious. But with the right partners ... like me," Jessica smiled, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Like you," Marcus confirmed. "Your family's influence in Asian markets, combined with my understanding of the company's infrastructure through my father. We could do this." Jessica closed her laptop. Decision made. "I'm in, but on one condition. We do this legally and ethically. No shortcuts, no grey areas." "Agreed." Marcus extended his hand. "We'll beat him at his own game, using his own rules against him." They spent the next 3 hours outlining their plan. Jessica's connections would help orchestrate a series of small but significant contract losses in Asia. Meanwhile, Marcus would use his growing knowledge of corporate law to identify regulatory vulnerabilities. "There's one more thing," Jessica said as they packed up. "We should bring in Thomas Rivera from my advanced financial modeling class. His father's firm specializes in corporate restructuring." Marcus considered this. "The more diverse our team, the harder it will be for Maxwell to see us coming. Set up a meeting." That evening, Marcus called his father again. Richard was just finishing his first day as a regular maintenance worker, his voice tired but resolute. "How are your classes, son?" "Good, Dad." "I'm learning a lot about corporate structure and responsibility," Marcus replied, watching the sunset from his dorm window. "How was your day?" "Different," Richard sighed. "Jordan had me clean his office bathroom today." Made a point of watching me do it. Marcus's grip tightened on his phone. Things won't always be this way, Dad. I promise you that. After hanging up, Marcus opened his laptop and typed out an email to Thomas Rivera. The subject line read Investment Opportunity Confidential. The pieces were beginning to move. The private study room in Harvard's Baker Library hummed with potential as Marcus faced Thomas Rivera and two other carefully selected classmates. Sarah Goldstein, whose family ran a prominent investment firm, and Devon Park, a computer science prodigy specializing in market analysis algorithms, sat attentively as Marcus laid out his vision. What Jordan Maxwell doesn't understand, Marcus explained, standing before his digital presentation, is that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's bad business. And we're going to prove it. Thomas leaned forward, his legal pad already filled with notes. My father's firm has been watching Stellar Enterprises. They're vulnerable. Maxwell's alienating minority-owned suppliers, losing diversity-focused clients. Exactly, Sarah interjected, pulling up market projections, and companies with poor diversity metrics are increasingly struggling to attract institutional investors. I've already identified 3 major funds considering pulling out. Devon's fingers flew across his keyboard. I've developed an algorithm tracking Maxwell's decision patterns. There's a clear correlation between his prejudiced choices and declining company value. Look at this trend line. Marcus absorbed their input, his plan crystallizing. Each of us brings something crucial to this table. Sarah, your family's investment connections. Thomas, your corporate restructuring expertise. Devon, your technical analysis. And Jessica's Asian market influence. But we need more, Sarah pointed out. To take over a company this size, we need serious capital backing. Marcus smiled. That's where my father comes in indirectly. Every day Maxwell humiliates him, I document it. Every contract lost due to Maxwell's prejudices, every talented employee who quits, every diversity initiative he kills. It's all ammunition. For what? Thomas asked. For when we approach major investment firms, Marcus explained. We're not just offering them a business opportunity. We're offering them a chance to be on the right side of history. Corporate America is changing. Maxwell represents the past. We represent the future. Devon looked up from his laptop. I've identified 15 similar takeovers in the past decade. Success rate increases by 40% when there's a clear ethical component to the strategy. But timing is crucial, Sarah added. We need to wait until we're graduated and established. Too soon, and we'll look like angry students. Too late, and Maxwell might stabilize his position. Marcus nodded, thinking of his father cleaning Maxwell's bathroom. 3 years. We graduate next year. 1 year to build our professional credentials, 1 year to secure backing and begin preliminary moves. And then Thomas asked. Then we show Jordan Maxwell that karma doesn't forget, Marcus replied, his voice steady. We're not just taking his company. We're going to make him understand exactly why he's losing it. The group spent the next 2 hours refining their roles. Sarah would begin quietly discussing Stellar Enterprises with her family's investment partners. Thomas would draft preliminary takeover strategies. Devon would continue developing his analysis tools. As they packed up, Sarah paused. Marcus, are you sure you can wait 3 years? Watching your father endure this... Marcus met her concerned gaze. Every day Maxwell mistreats my father, he's digging his own grave deeper. Dad taught me patience. Maxwell's about to learn why that matters. 1 year later... Richard Johnson's hands trembled slightly as he changed the light fixtures in Jordan Maxwell's executive bathroom. His demotion had evolved into a year of calculated humiliations. Today Maxwell had scheduled an important client meeting specifically when he knew Richard would be on his maintenance rounds. Oh, don't mind him, Jordan's voice carried from the office. Just our maintenance man. These people need to earn their keep. Right laughter followed. Richard focused on the task at hand, thinking of Marcus's weekly calls. His son had graduated summa cum laude and landed a position at Goldman Sachs, but something in Marcus's voice had changed over the past year, a steely determination that both worried and proud Richard. Meanwhile, across town in his Manhattan office, Marcus was building his reputation with calculated precision. His desk held 3 computer monitors, one tracking Stellar Enterprises stock, another showing his growing investment portfolio, and the third displaying a private message board where his Harvard team coordinated their moves. Sarah, Dad's firm is interested. They've noticed the pattern of discrimination lawsuits against Stellar. Devon algorithm shows Maxwell's decisions have cost shareholders 28% in potential gains. Jessica, 3 more Asian contracts lost this quarter. My father's friends are concerned. Thomas preparing preliminary takeover documentation. Timeline still on track. Marcus typed back maintained position. Year 2 begins now. He minimized the chat and opened a fresh email to Jordan Maxwell. His hand hovered over the keyboard as he composed his first direct contact. Dear Mr. Maxwell, I'm reaching out regarding potential investment opportunities in Stellar Enterprises. My team has noted some concerning trends in your company's performance. The email was perfectly professional, designed to seem like one of hundreds Maxwell must receive. But Marcus added one subtle detail. His signature included his full name, Marcus Johnson. Within an hour, Maxwell's dismissive reply arrived, not interested in advice from junior analysts. Stick to your spreadsheets, kid. Marcus smiled, saving the email in a folder labeled Evidence of Poor Leadership. He turned to a photo on his desk, his father at his graduation. Proud, despite the exhaustion evident in his eyes. Soon, Dad, he whispered. His phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Meeting with Singapore investors confirmed. They're very interested in our analysis of Stellar's weaknesses. Marcus replied, perfect. Phase 2 begins next month. Maxwell won't know what hit him until it's too late. As the sun set over Manhattan, Marcus reviewed his latest acquisition reports. Through various shell companies and quiet purchases, their group now owned 3% of Stellar Enterprises. Not enough to raise alarms, but a solid foundation for what was to come. His father's voicemail from earlier played in his mind. Son, Maxwell had me clean his entire office today while he conducted meetings. Said it showed everyone their proper place in the world. Marcus closed his eyes, channeling his anger into focus. In his experience, men like Maxwell never saw their downfall coming until it was too late. They were too blinded by their own prejudices to notice the quiet assembly of justice. In Stellar Enterprises' executive washroom, Richard methodically scrubbed the marble countertops while trying to ignore the conversation drifting in from Maxwell's office. Of course we're letting Chen Industries go. Jordan Maxwell's voice rang with dismissive authority. I don't care if they're offering better terms. I prefer working with traditional partners. Richard's phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Marcus. Stay strong, Dad. Things are changing. If only Maxwell could see what was happening behind the scenes. At that very moment, in a sleek Singapore conference room, Jessica Chen was meeting with her father's business associates, her presentation titled Strategic Acquisition Opportunities in the American Market. Stellar Enterprises is systematically alienating Asian partnerships, Jessica explained to the assembled executives. Their current CEO has rejected 6 major contracts this year alone, all with highly profitable Asian firms. The projector displayed a graph showing Stellar's declining market share. An elderly businessman raised his hand. And you believe this creates an opportunity? Jessica smiled. We've identified a clear path to acquisition. Their CEO's prejudices have created multiple vulnerabilities. With proper backing, we estimate a successful takeover within 18 months. Meanwhile, in New York, Marcus sat in a private meeting with Sarah Goldstein's father, David, a legendary hedge fund manager. Walk me through it again, David said, studying Marcus intently. Why Stellar? Marcus opened a thick folder. Beyond the financial metrics, Mr. Goldstein, It's about transformation. Maxwell's leadership style isn't just morally bankrupt, it's destroying shareholder value. Look at these numbers. He laid out document after document. Discrimination complaints, lost contracts, declining employee retention rates, all meticulously documented. The company's rot starts at the top, Marcus continued. Maxwell inherited his position but lacks the vision to lead in today's world. He's destroying what his father built. David Goldstein leaned back, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. Johnson. Any relation to Richard Johnson? Marcus met his gaze steadily. My father. He's worked there for 20 years. Maxwell demoted him last year, not for performance, but for being the wrong type of supervisor. I see, David replied thoughtfully. And this isn't about revenge? No, sir. It's about justice and profit. Maxwell's prejudices make him predictable. Predictable leaders can be outmaneuvered. Back at Stellar, Jordan Maxwell was berating Richard for missing a spot on the mirror, unaware that his own reflection showed a man whose time was running out. Richard's phone buzzed again. This time it was a group chat with Marcus and his team. Marcus Asian Consortium is in. Goldstein meeting successful. Jessica Singapore team ready. Sarah Dad's on board. Full backing confirmed. Thomas legal framework complete. Devon algorithm predicts optimal strike point in 4 months. Richard smiled slightly as he wiped the mirror one last time, Maxwell's insults washing over him like rain. His son's quiet patience was about to pay off in ways Maxwell couldn't imagine. 4 months later, Jordan Maxwell stormed into his morning executive meeting, face flushed with anger. He slammed a financial report onto the conference table, making his subordinates jump. Will someone explain why Chen Industries just acquired 3 of our supplier companies? He demanded, glaring at his chief financial officer. The CFO shifted uncomfortably. Sir, after we terminated our contracts with them, they began strategic acquisitions of our supply chain. They now control 30% of our raw materials sourcing. And nobody saw this coming. Maxwell's voice rose. These people are supposed to know their place in the market. In New York, Marcus received the news with quiet satisfaction. He turned to Jessica, who was sharing his office for the week. Your father's friends move quickly. They've waited years for someone to challenge Maxwell, Jessica replied, updating their strategy document. Phase 3 can begin ahead of schedule. Marcus's phone lit up with a text from his father. Maxwell's having a meltdown. Something about suppliers. Just watch, Dad. Marcus typed back. It's starting. Across town, Sarah Goldstein was meeting with institutional investors, her presentation focusing on Stellar's governance issues. The company's leadership has demonstrated a pattern of decisions that directly conflict with modern corporate responsibility standards. She explained to the assembled fund managers. Devon's algorithm had predicted this moment precisely when Maxwell's prejudices would begin to visibly impact the bottom line. Thomas had already prepared the legal groundwork for what would come next. Back at Stellar, Maxwell was facing his board for the first time since the supplier crisis began. These numbers are concerning, Jordan, the lead director, noted. Our stock is down 12% since the Chen Industries situation became public. It's a temporary setback, Maxwell insisted. We'll find new suppliers. At what cost? Another director challenged. And why did we lose Chen Industries in the first place? Maxwell straightened his tie defensively. They weren't a good cultural fit. Cultural fit, the director repeated skeptically. Their terms were better than our current suppliers. This decision has cost us millions. As the board meeting deteriorated, Marcus received another update from their inside source, a junior executive whom Maxwell had previously passed over for promotion due to her gender. Board is asking questions. Maxwell's explanations aren't landing. Perfect time for next phase. Marcus gathered his team for a video conference. Time to increase pressure. Sarah, activate the institutional investors. Jessica, have your father's group raise supplier prices 5%. Devon, leak the algorithm's analysis to key financial bloggers. Thomas, prepare the minority shareholder lawsuit. What about your father? Jessica asked softly. Marcus checked his phone. Another text from Richard. Maxwell's making me clean his office twice daily now. Says he needs everything perfect while he handles this crisis. Dad's daily humiliation is Maxwell's daily reminder of his own failures, Marcus replied. Every time he punishes my father, he proves why he doesn't deserve to lead. The pieces were moving faster now, dominoes falling in precisely the pattern they'd planned. Maxwell's empire was beginning to crumble, and he didn't even know who was behind it. 3 weeks after the supplier crisis began, Jordan Maxwell sat alone in his office, staring at the latest headlines on his tablet. Stellar Enterprises under fire, discrimination lawsuits mount. Major investors question leadership after supply chain crisis. Corporate governance experts criticize Stellar's outdated management culture. His hands shook slightly as he buzzed his assistant. Get Richard up here. Now. 10 minutes later, Richard Johnson entered quietly, cleaning supplies in hand. Maxwell barely looked up. The brass fixtures are tarnished. Clean them. All of them. And I want to see my reflection in every surface. As Richard worked methodically, Maxwell paced, muttering to himself. These people, thinking they can push me out. My father built this company. In Manhattan, Marcus watched Stellar's stock price tick down another percentage point. Devon's analysis had gone viral in financial circles, prompting questions about Maxwell's leadership that couldn't be ignored. Sarah burst into his office, excitement in her eyes. 3 major pension funds just announced they're reviewing their positions in Stellar. They're citing serious concerns about corporate culture and governance. Marcus nodded, pulling up their timeline. Right on schedule. How's the shareholder lawsuit progressing? Thomas filed this morning, Sarah replied. The evidence of discriminatory practices is overwhelming. Maxwell's own emails are damning. Marcus's phone buzzed. Jessica was calling from Singapore. Marcus, Chen Industries just raised prices another 3%. Maxwell's alternatives can't match their quality or scale. He's trapped. Good, Marcus replied. Keep the pressure on. Has he tried reaching out to your father? Yes, Jessica laughed. Dad said Maxwell's message was full of thinly veiled racist undertones. He's forwarded it to our legal team. Meanwhile, Richard observed Maxwell's increasing agitation as he polished the office's brass fixtures. The CEO's phone kept buzzing with urgent messages, each one making him more agitated. This is your fault, somehow Maxwell suddenly snapped at Richard. You and your kind, always trying to tear down what we've built. Richard kept polishing, his voice steady. No, sir. I just cleaned the fixtures. Don't get smart with me, Maxwell snarled. I can still fire you completely. Yes, Sir, Richard replied calmly, thinking of Marcus's last message. Stay strong, Dad. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Back in New York, Marcus received an urgent email from their inside source. Maxwell just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. He's blaming outside agitators for the company's problems. Marcus smiled, forwarding the message to his team. Phase 4 begins tomorrow. Sarah, have your father attend that board meeting. Jessica, time for your father to announce Chen Industries' new American expansion plans. Thomas, leak the discrimination lawsuit details to the press. He paused, looking at a new photo on his desk. Richard at his maintenance job, taken secretly by a sympathetic co-worker. Maxwell's reflection was visible in the window behind him, sneering as Richard cleaned. Almost there, Dad, Marcus whispered. Almost there. The Stellar Enterprises boardroom crackled with tension the next morning. Jordan Maxwell stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence cracking as he faced increasingly hostile board members. Among them sat David Goldstein, his presence as a major shareholder adding extra pressure. Our stock has dropped 28% in 6 weeks, the lead director stated flatly. Suppliers are squeezing us. 3 discrimination lawsuits have gone public. Mr. Maxwell, we need answers. Outside the boardroom, Richard quietly replenished water pitchers, carefully keeping his expression neutral as Maxwell began his defense. This is a coordinated attack, Maxwell insisted, pacing. These foreign suppliers, these lawsuits, it's all designed to undermine traditional American business values. David Goldstein cleared his throat. Traditional values? Is that what you called it when you demoted Richard Johnson last year? Maxwell froze. Who? Your maintenance supervisor of 15 years, Goldstein continued, opening a folder. Demoted without cause, despite saving the company millions through his efficiency programs. I have the documentation here. That was a strategic restructuring, Maxwell stammered. Like refusing Chen Industries contracts was strategic, another director challenged. Their new American subsidiary just announced plans to compete directly with us in 3 markets. In New York, Marcus watched the board meeting unfold through live updates from their inside source. Maxwell losing control. Board asking about discrimination patterns. Goldstein brought up your father. Maxwell sweating. Jessica entered Marcus's office with fresh intelligence. Chen Industries' announcement is hitting the markets. Stella's stock just dropped another 5%. Marcus nodded, sending a message to Thomas, release the second wave of evidence now. Within minutes, financial news channels began reporting on newly leaked emails showing Maxwell's systematic discrimination against minorities, women, and international partners. Back in the boardroom, tablets and phones buzzed with the breaking news. Maxwell's face went pale as he read the headlines. These emails are taken out of context, he protested weakly. Like the context of having Richard Johnson clean your private bathroom while you conduct meetings, Goldstein asked sharply. Or the context of rejecting qualified minority candidates for executive positions. Richard, still quietly working outside, heard Maxwell's voice rise in desperation. This is my company. My father built this. And you're destroying it, the lead director replied. We're calling for a vote of no confidence. Marcus received the update in real-time board voting. Maxwell shouting, security on standby. He sent a quick text to his father, how's Maxwell looking now? Richard replied like a man watching his kingdom crumble. He just knocked over the water pitcher I filled. Told me to clean it up while they vote. Marcus smiled grimly. Let him have his last moment of power, Dad. It's almost over. The vote was unanimous. By sundown, Jordan Maxwell had been suspended pending a full investigation, escorted from the building by security as employees watched through office windows. Richard Johnson maintained his composure as Maxwell passed him in the lobby, even as the former CEO spat out one final insult. This is your fault, somehow, Maxwell hissed. You and your son, yes, I finally remembered who he is. The Goldman analyst asking questions about my company. Richard simply nodded. Have a good evening, Mr. Maxwell. In New York, Marcus received the news with his team gathered in his office. Sarah pulled up the latest stock reports while Devon's algorithms projected the market's reaction to Maxwell's suspension. Phase 5 begins now, Marcus announced. Thomas, initiate the tender offer through our shell companies. Jessica, have Chen Industries announce their willingness to negotiate with new leadership. Sarah, get your father to call an emergency shareholder meeting. His phone buzzed a message from Maxwell himself. You think you're clever, boy? Using your Wall Street friends and foreign connections to steal my company. You're still just a maintenance man's son. Marcus read the message aloud to his team, then typed his response. No, Mr. Maxwell. I'm a Harvard graduate with a perfect GPA, multiple investor backers, and a deep understanding of modern business practices. You're the one who never learned that character matters more than inheritance. Jessica looked up from her laptop. Marcus, Chen Industries is ready to announce their support for new leadership. My father suggests timing it with the shareholder meeting. Perfect, Marcus replied. Thomas, what's the status of our stock position? Through various entities, we control 23% now. With the institutional investors backing us and the board's support, we have effective control. Devon's algorithm flashed a new prediction, Maxwell likely to attempt counter moves within 48 hours. Probability of success 12%. Marcus nodded, then called his father. Dad, how are you holding up? Son Richard's voice was quiet. The interim CEO just offered me my old position back, with a raise. Take it, Marcus advised. We need to show we're better than Maxwell. Success is the best revenge. As night fell over both cities, Marcus received one final update. Maxwell had been seen clearing out his office, throwing a photo of his father's company founding into a box. The security camera footage showed him pausing at Richard's maintenance cart, still in the hallway. For a moment, Maxwell stared at the simple tools of the man he'd humiliated for so long. Then he turned away, carrying his box of memories toward the elevator. Your father was right about one thing, Jessica said, watching the footage with Marcus. Some people are meant to lead, and others to follow. Maxwell just never understood which category he belonged in. The next morning, Jordan Maxwell proved Devon's algorithm right. He called an emergency press conference outside Stellar Enterprises, his expensive suit slightly rumpled, his usual arrogance tainted with desperation. This is a hostile takeover attempt by foreign interests and their domestic conspirators, he declared to assemble reporters. They're using accusations of discrimination to destroy a great American company. My father's company. Inside the building, Richard watched the broadcast on the lobby television while supervising his reinstated maintenance team. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Let him dig his own grave. In Marcus's office, the team monitored Maxwell's increasingly erratic statements. He's claiming racial bias against white executives, Sarah reported, reading live updates. Says he's the real victim of discrimination. Perfect, Thomas smiled, reviewing legal documents. Every word he speaks strengthens our position. The shareholders will see this for what it is, a privileged man, unable to accept that his actions have consequences. Marcus's phone rang, David Goldstein calling. Marcus, Maxwell just tried to contact our major shareholders directly. He's offering private deals to maintain control. As we predicted, Marcus replied. How's the response? Nobody's biting. His reputation is toxic now. But be careful, cornered animals are dangerous. The warning proved prescient. Within hours, Maxwell held another press conference, this time targeting Marcus directly. This takeover is being orchestrated by Marcus Johnson, son of a maintenance worker, using foreign money to destroy American business values. Should we let our companies fall into the hands of people who don't understand our traditions? Jessica, watching beside Marcus, clenched her fists. He's really doing this. In 2024. Marcus remained calm, typing a response for their PR team, Stellar Enterprises. Success was built by dedicated workers like Richard Johnson, not by inherited privilege. Modern business requires modern leadership that values merit over prejudice. The statement went viral within minutes. #Stellar Values began trending, with thousands sharing stories of discrimination under Maxwell's leadership. Richard called his son. Marcus, Maxwell just showed up at my department, demanded to know how long we'd been planning this. What did you tell him? That he taught me everything I needed to know about planning ahead every time he made me clean his office while he insulted me in front of clients. Marcus smiled. Perfect answer, Dad. How did he take it? Security had to escort him out. Again. Devon's algorithm flashed new projections. Maxwell's public meltdown had accelerated their timeline. Shareholder support for removal had reached 78%. Time to end this, Marcus announced to his team. Sarah, call the shareholder meeting for tomorrow. Jessica, have Chen Industries released their full evidence of Maxwell's discriminatory contract rejections. Thomas, prepare the final takeover documents. Maxwell's voice echoed from the TV. This company is my birthright. No, Marcus said quietly. It's about to become his legacy, a lesson in how prejudice blinds you to your own destruction. The Stellar Enterprises main conference center buzzed with tension as shareholders filed in for the emergency meeting. Security was tight. Maxwell had threatened to expose the truth during the proceedings. Marcus sat in the back row with his team, watching Richard take his place at the maintenance control panel. Even now, his father maintained his professionalism, checking the room systems one final time. All shareholders present or represented by proxy, Thomas confirmed, reviewing the attendance records. We have 92% participation, highest in company history. The board chairman opened the meeting, his voice grave. We're here to address the leadership crisis at Stellar Enterprises. Mr. Maxwell has requested to speak first. Jordan Maxwell strode to the podium, but something had changed. His usual swagger had been replaced by a barely controlled desperation. Look around this room, he began, gesturing wildly. My father built this company with certain values, certain understandings about who should be in charge. Now we have maintenance workers' children conspiring with foreign interests too. Point of order, David Goldstein interrupted. Could Mr. Maxwell explain how Marcus Johnson's background is relevant to his business qualifications? Maxwell's face reddened. Qualifications? I'll tell you about qualifications. That boy's father cleans my office, and now he thinks. That boy graduated top of his class from Harvard Business School. Another shareholder cut in. While under your leadership, our stock has dropped 45%. Marcus watched quietly as Maxwell unraveled, his prejudices on full display. Each word strengthened their position, each bitter comment proved their point about his unfitness to lead. Dad, Marcus texted, how's the view from the control panel? Richard replied, like watching a man dig his own grave with a golden shovel. Maxwell was now attacking Chen Industries directly, his language becoming increasingly racist. Jessica recorded every word for their legal team while Sarah live-streamed the meltdown to key institutional investors. Mr. Maxwell, the chairman, finally interrupted. Perhaps we should move to the vote. Vote? Maxwell laughed bitterly. You want to vote on giving my company to them? To people like Johnson's boy and his foreign friends? Marcus stood then, his voice carrying clearly across the room. No, Mr. Maxwell. They're voting on whether to save this company from a leader who values prejudice over profit, inheritance over innovation, and pride over progress. The room fell silent. Maxwell stared at Marcus, finally recognizing him fully. You planned this all along, ever since I demoted your father. No, Marcus replied calmly. You planned this. Every time you humiliated a dedicated worker. Every time you rejected a qualified candidate because of their race or gender. Every time you let your prejudices override good business sense, you built your own downfall piece by piece. The voting began. Richard watched from his position as shareholders raised their hands, one by one, ending the Maxwell era at Stellar Enterprises. As the final votes were tallied, Jordan Maxwell sat alone in a corner of the conference room, watching his family's legacy slip away. The numbers were devastating, 89% in favor of his immediate removal. The shareholders have spoken, the chairman announced. Jordan Maxwell is hereby removed as CEO of Stellar Enterprises, effective immediately. But Marcus's team wasn't finished. Thomas approached the podium with their prepared succession plan. We propose a new leadership structure, he began, one that reflects modern corporate values and global business realities. Our coalition of investors, led by Marcus Johnson, presents the following restructuring plan. The presentation was methodical, addressing every weakness Maxwell had created. Jessica outlined new partnerships with Asian markets. Sarah presented strategies for diverse hiring and promotion. Devon demonstrated how his algorithm predicted a 60% stock recovery under the new leadership. Maxwell couldn't stay silent. "You're all fools," he shouted, standing abruptly. "Johnson, you think you've won? You're still just a—" "Careful, Mr. Maxwell," Marcus interrupted calmly. "Every word you speak now becomes evidence in the discrimination lawsuits. Would you like to add more examples of prejudice to the record?" Richard, still at his maintenance post, watched his son handle the situation with quiet pride. The contrast was stark, Maxwell becoming more unhinged, while Marcus remained perfectly composed. "I'd like to address the shareholders," Marcus said, moving to the podium. "Not as the victor in a takeover, but as someone who understands what makes companies truly great. It's not about who your father was, it's about what you build for the future." He outlined his vision: a company where merit determined success, where diversity drove innovation, where every employee from maintenance to management was treated with respect. "Mr. Maxwell taught us all a valuable lesson," Marcus continued. "He showed us how quickly prejudice can destroy what others spent decades building. We're here to rebuild, not just the company's value, but its values." As Marcus spoke, Maxwell stood and walked toward the exit. He paused beside Richard's maintenance cart, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You must be so proud," he spat at Richard. "Your son destroying everything my family built." Richard adjusted a control panel setting before responding. "No, Mr. Maxwell. My son is saving what your father built from what you destroyed. There's a difference." Marcus watched this exchange from the podium, then delivered his final point: the first change we're making. The maintenance department will be renamed Facilities Management and given equal status with other divisions. Because everyone who contributes to this company's success deserves respect. The shareholders applauded. Maxwell stormed out. And Richard Johnson smiled as he monitored the building's systems, knowing that his years of quiet dignity had taught his son the most valuable business lesson of all: true leadership isn't about power over others, it's about lifting everyone up. The week following Maxwell's removal transformed Stellar Enterprises. Marcus moved swiftly but deliberately, understanding that lasting change requires careful implementation. His first official act as CEO surprised everyone. He moved his office to a middle floor, converting the executive penthouse into a common area for all employees. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone: no more looking down on others. Richard watched from his newly appointed position as Director of Facilities Management as his son dismantled Maxwell's old power structure piece by piece. The maintenance staff, once relegated to service entrances and back hallways, now attended department meetings and contributed to efficiency planning. "The building systems are the company's circulatory system," Marcus explained in his first all-hands meeting. "And nobody knows that system better than the people who've kept it running all these years." But not everything went smoothly. Maxwell had left behind loyal supporters who resisted the changes. During a tense executive meeting, one of the old guard spoke up. "With all due respect, Mr. Johnson," the VP of Sales said, his tone suggesting little respect, "aren't we moving too fast? Some of our traditional clients might be uncomfortable with such dramatic changes." Marcus leaned forward, his voice steady. "Let me be clear. If any client is uncomfortable doing business with a company that values equality and merit, they're welcome to take their business elsewhere. We're building for the future, not preserving the past." Jessica, now head of international relations, reported increasing interest from Asian markets. Sarah's connections brought in new investors attracted to the company's reformed culture. Devon's algorithms predicted a faster recovery than initially expected. Richard found himself in an unexpected position: bridge between the old and new. Veteran employees sought his advice on adapting to the changes, while newer hires asked about the company's history. "Your son's different," a long-time janitor told Richard during lunch. "He looks us in the eye, knows our names. Maxwell never even acknowledged we existed." The most significant moment came when Marcus discovered Maxwell's old special bathroom, the one Richard had been forced to clean while enduring humiliation. "Tear it out," Marcus ordered. Convert it into a meditation room open to all employees. Put a plaque on the door, change begins with respect. Later that evening, as father and son shared a quiet moment in Marcus's new office, Richard noticed something on his son's desk, Maxwell's old golden paperweight, the one he'd used to intimidate people. "Why keep that?" Richard asked. Marcus picked it up, studying it thoughtfully. Reminder of what happens when power isn't tempered with humanity. Besides, he smiled, "I'm having it melted down. We're using the gold to make service recognition pins for our longest-serving employees. You'll get the first one." Richard shook his head, emotion threatening to break through his usual composure. "Son, I never imagined." "I learned from the best," Dad, Marcus replied. "You taught me that true strength isn't about pushing others down, it's about lifting them up. Maxwell never understood that. That's why he lost everything." 3 months into Marcus's leadership, Jordan Maxwell resurfaced in the most predictable way through a scathing interview with a conservative business magazine. The article, titled "Woke Takeover: The Death of Traditional Business Values," landed on Marcus's desk one morning. "Have you seen this?" Jessica asked, entering his office with a tablet. "Maxwell claims we orchestrated a cultural coup and destroyed the natural business hierarchy." Marcus scanned the article, noting Maxwell's bitterness bleeding through every quote. "The Johnson boy wouldn't know real leadership if it cleaned his bathroom. Now they've got maintenance workers sitting in on board meetings. It's an insult to everything business stands for." Rather than anger, Marcus felt a strange satisfaction. "Send this to legal," he told Jessica. "Every quote proves exactly why we needed change." The magazine piece had an unexpected effect. Stellar's stock jumped 12% as more progressive investors took notice. Sarah's father called with news that 3 major ESG funds were increasing their positions. "Maxwell just validated our entire strategy," Sarah reported. "His complaints about diversity and inclusion are reading like endorsements to modern investors." Meanwhile, Richard was leading his first executive presentation, a comprehensive energy efficiency proposal that would save millions annually. The same VP of sales who had questioned Marcus now sat stunned as Richard detailed innovations that had been ignored under Maxwell's leadership. "Why didn't you propose these changes before?" the VP asked. Richard's response was measured but pointed. "I did. Every year for a decade. Mr. Maxwell had his own ideas about whose opinions mattered." The transformation became even more visible when Chen Industries' CEO visited for partnership discussions. Jessica's father watched with approval as Richard led the facility tour, demonstrating the advanced systems he'd maintained for years. "Your father," Mr. Chen told Marcus later, "understands more about operational excellence than Maxwell ever did. The waste was not in the systems, but in ignoring the wisdom of those who ran them." That evening, Marcus found a small package on his desk. Inside was Maxwell's old office nameplate, sent anonymously with a note: "Thought you might want a souvenir of the old regime." Marcus called his father to his office and handed him the nameplate. "What should we do with this?" Richard studied the polished brass that he'd cleaned so many times. "There's a recycling program for metal waste. We could use it to make new equipment tags for the maintenance team." Marcus smiled at the poetry of it. "Perfect. One last time Maxwell's name will serve the people he looked down on." Later, reviewing the quarterly reports, Marcus noted that employee retention had reached record highs. The maintenance department, now facilities management, had become one of the most innovative divisions, with 3 patents pending for efficiency improvements. "Success," Marcus wrote in his journal, "is the best response to prejudice. But dignity," he added, thinking of his father, "is the best revenge." 1 year after the takeover, Stellar Enterprises hosted its annual shareholders meeting in the same conference center where Maxwell had fallen. But this time, the atmosphere was drastically different. The stock had doubled, employee satisfaction was at record highs, and the company had been named one of Forbes' most progressive workplaces. Marcus stood at the podium, his father seated in the front row, no longer at the maintenance panel, but as a respected executive. The presentation screens showed remarkable transformations. Discrimination complaints 0 in past 12 months. International partnerships up 340%. Employee retention 95%. Innovation patents filed 47 vs. 3 previous year. But the most powerful moment came during the QA session when an elderly shareholder stood up. "I've owned Stellar stock since Maxwell Sr. ran this company," he began. "I was skeptical when young Mr. Johnson took over. I want to apologize for that skepticism." The room grew quiet as he continued. "Last week I visited my grandson at Harvard Business School. They're using Stellar as a case study in modern corporate transformation. They call it the Johnson Doctrine, the idea that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business." Marcus glanced at his father, seeing the pride and emotion in Richard's eyes. The moment felt surreal, their story now being taught in the same halls where Marcus had first dreamed of this change. During a break, Jessica approached with breaking news on her tablet. "Maxwell's trying to start a new venture," she reported. "But no one will fund him. His reputation," she shrugged. "Let's just say the business world has evolved. Thomas added he applied for a position at 3 different companies. All rejected him. Apparently his management style is considered outdated and liability-prone." Richard overheard this and quietly shared something he'd been keeping to himself. "He came to see me last week." Marcus turned, surprised. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't important," Richard replied. "He wanted to know our secret, how we'd managed to turn everything around. He couldn't understand how a company could thrive without proper hierarchy." "What did you tell him?" Sarah asked. Richard smiled. "I said the same thing I used to think while cleaning his office. Success isn't about keeping people down. It's about lifting people up." He didn't understand. He probably never will. Marcus looked around the conference center at the diverse faces, the engaged discussions, the energy of positive change. On the wall hung a new company motto: "Excellence has no hierarchy." "You know what's ironic?" Marcus mused. "Maxwell always said some people were meant to lead and others to follow. He just never realized which category he belonged in." The afternoon session began with a special announcement: Stellar's new scholarship program for maintenance workers' children pursuing business degrees. They named it the Richard Johnson Future Leaders Fund. 18 months after the takeover, Marcus sat in a Harvard Business School auditorium, preparing to give a guest lecture. The case study on Stellar's transformation had become required reading in corporate ethics courses across the country. As students filed in, he noticed their diverse backgrounds, a stark contrast to his own time at Harvard. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard, nervous son. "A little," Marcus replied honestly. "But good nervous."
Professor Chen, Jessica's father, introduced him. Today's speaker proved that moral leadership and profitable business aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, he demonstrated they're intrinsically linked. Marcus began with a simple question. Who here has ever felt underestimated because of who they are rather than what they can do? More than half the hands went up. "That's why we're here today," he continued, "to discuss how prejudice doesn't just hurt people. It blinds organizations to talent, innovation, and growth." He shared previously unreleased details about the takeover, revealing how Maxwell's biases had created the very vulnerabilities that led to his downfall. The students were particularly interested in the role Richard had played. "My father taught me something crucial," Marcus explained. "When people underestimate you, let them. Their prejudice becomes their weakness, not yours." During the Q&A, a maintenance worker's daughter stood up. "Sir, because of your scholarship program, I'm here at Harvard, but some classmates suggest I don't belong." Marcus smiled. 10 years ago, I sat where you are, hearing similar whispers. Today, those same types of people are studying how I transformed a billion-dollar company. Excellence speaks louder than prejudice." After the lecture, Professor Chen shared surprising news. Jordan Maxwell applied for a teaching position here, wanted to offer a traditional perspective on leadership. "What happened?" Marcus asked, though he could guess. The committee cited Stella's case study as evidence that his methods are obsolete. Times have changed. Later that evening, Marcus visited his father at Stella. Richard was leading a training session for new facilities managers, teaching them his innovative systems approach that had saved millions. "How was Harvard?" Richard asked during a break. "Different," Marcus replied. "They're teaching business students about respect and dignity as core leadership principles. Your story is part of the curriculum." Richard shook his head modestly. "I just did my job." "No, Dad. You did more than that. You showed me that true power isn't about position, it's about principle." Marcus's phone buzzed with an alert. Another major corporation had just appointed a former maintenance worker to their board, citing the Johnson Doctrine as inspiration. "See that?" Marcus showed his father the news. "You didn't just change Stella, you're changing how business thinks about talent and leadership." Richard smiled, remembering all those years of quiet dignity under Maxwell's abuse. Sometimes the longest roads lead to the best destinations. 2 years after the takeover, Jordan Maxwell made one final attempt to reclaim his narrative. He self-published a memoir titled Stolen Legacy: How Woke Culture Destroyed American Business. The book landed on Marcus's desk with a thud. "Should we respond?" Jessica asked during the morning executive meeting. Marcus opened the book to a random page and read aloud. "The maintenance man's son destroyed everything my father built by putting feelings above function." Richard, now Executive Vice President of Operations, chuckled. "Interesting perspective from someone whose prejudice cost shareholders millions." "The market will respond for us," Marcus decided. "Release our quarterly numbers." The timing couldn't have been better. Stella's innovations in sustainable building management, led by Richard's team, had just secured a billion-dollar government contract. Employee-led initiatives had reduced operating costs by 40%. The stock had tripled since Maxwell's departure. Maxwell's book sold poorly, but it sparked an unexpected movement. Former employees began sharing their stories online under the hashtag Stella Transformation. "I was passed over for promotion 6 times under Maxwell because I was too ethnic for client meetings. Maxwell made me use the service elevator because he said my wheelchair would upset important visitors." The maintenance team solved problems Maxwell's expensive consultants couldn't even identify. The hashtag went viral, catching the attention of business schools nationwide. Marcus received invitations to speak about organizational culture and inclusive leadership, but it was Richard's story that resonated most deeply. During one particularly powerful conference presentation, Richard shared something he'd never told anyone, not even Marcus. "The day Maxwell demoted me," he revealed, "he said something I'll never forget. Know your place." What he never understood was that I did know my place. It wasn't where he thought it was, at his feet. It was wherever I could add the most value regardless of title. The audience sat silent, then erupted in applause. Later that week, a young maintenance worker stopped Richard in the hallway. "Sir, I'm taking night classes in engineering. Some people say I'm wasting my time." Richard smiled, remembering similar doubts. 10 years ago, people said my son was wasting his time at Harvard. Now he's teaching there. Never let someone else's limitations become your reality." Marcus, overhearing this, felt a profound sense of completion. The company wasn't just profitable, it was becoming what his father had always believed it could be, a place where ability mattered more than appearance, where innovation could come from any level, where dignity wasn't a privilege but a right. That evening, as they left the office, they passed Maxwell's old executive bathroom, now a popular meditation room. The plaque reading, "Change begins with respect," had become a company landmark. "You know what Maxwell never understood?" Marcus said to his father. "Leadership isn't inherited, it's earned, every day, through every action, with every person." 3 years after the takeover, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Jordan Maxwell Jr., fresh out of business school, stood nervously in the reception area of what had once been his father's empire. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the young man said when Marcus invited him in. "I'm here to understand." Marcus studied him carefully. He had his father's features but lacked the arrogance. "Understand what?" "How you did it. Not just the takeover, but the transformation. Our family's company is more successful than ever, but it's different. Better." They walked through the building, now buzzing with diverse energy. Teams collaborated in open spaces. The old hierarchical barriers had dissolved. Innovation flowed freely between departments. "My father's memoir," Jordan Jr. continued, "it doesn't match what I'm seeing here. He wrote about destruction, but I see growth. He claimed you destroyed his legacy, but you've built something remarkable." They reached the facilities management department, where Richard was mentoring a group of young engineers, some former maintenance workers who'd earned degrees through Stella's education program. "Your grandfather built this company on innovation and hard work," Marcus explained. "Your father forgot that those qualities don't belong to any one group or class. We just remembered it." Jordan Jr. watched Richard's team present a new energy-saving system they'd developed. "In my father's time, would these ideas have been heard?" "No," Marcus replied honestly, "and that was the problem. Your father confused position with worth. He thought leadership came from title rather than talent." Later, Richard joined them in Marcus's office. Jordan Jr. stood awkwardly, aware of his father's treatment of this man. "Mr. Johnson," he began, "I want to apologize for how my father treated you. I've read the case studies, seen the records. It was wrong." Richard's response surprised both young men. "Your grandfather once told me something your father forgot. He said, 'A building is only as strong as its foundation.' He wasn't just talking about maintenance. He meant people, all people." Jordan Jr. nodded slowly. "I'm starting my own company soon. Would you both be willing to advise me? I want to do it right from the beginning." Marcus exchanged glances with his father, seeing the potential for healing old wounds. "On one condition," Marcus said. "Remember that every person in your company, from CEO to custodian, has value and deserves respect." "That's the lesson my father never learned," Jordan Jr. acknowledged, "but I will." As they walked him out, they passed the wall of employee innovations, patents, awards and improvements, many from people his father had overlooked or underestimated. "Your father was right about one thing," Marcus told him. "Some people are meant to lead and others to follow. He just didn't understand that leadership isn't about who you are, it's about how you treat others." 5 years to the day after Maxwell's removal, Stella Enterprises hosted a special anniversary celebration. The company had become a case study in successful corporate transformation, its stock value quintupled, and its culture celebrated worldwide. In the same conference room where Maxwell had fallen, Marcus stood before a packed audience. But this time he wasn't the main speaker, Richard was. "5 years ago," Richard began, "I stood in this room cleaning floors while decisions were made about my future. Today I stand here making decisions about all our futures." He paused, looking at the diverse faces before him. "But this isn't a story about revenge. It's about justice, not just for me, but for everyone who was ever told to know their place." The audience included Jordan Maxwell Jr., now running his own successful startup with guidance from both Johnsons. His father hadn't spoken to him since he'd publicly denounced the old leadership style and embraced the Johnson doctrine. Marcus watched proudly as his father unveiled the company's newest initiative, the Stella Foundation for Workplace Dignity, funded by a percentage of those patents and innovations that the maintenance team had developed, but Maxwell had ignored. "The greatest waste in business," Richard continued, "isn't inefficient systems, it's undervalued people. Today we're ensuring that waste never happens again." The foundation would provide education, mentorship, and startup funding for employees at all levels who had innovative ideas but lacked opportunities. As if to punctuate the moment, breaking news flashed across phones. Jordan Maxwell's latest venture had filed for bankruptcy. His investors had pulled out after leaked emails showed he was still practicing the same discriminatory policies that had led to his downfall at Stella. After the ceremony, Marcus found his father standing in front of Maxwell's old office, now a collaborative innovation space where employees from all departments worked together. "Remember when he made you clean this office while he conducted meetings?" Marcus asked. Richard nodded. Every insult, every humiliation, it all led to this moment. Not because we sought revenge, but because we proved him wrong about everything he believed. The day ended with a final surprise. The Harvard Business Review had named Stella's transformation the most significant corporate culture change of the decade. The article's title, "From Maintenance to Magnificence, How Dignity Rebuilt an Empire." As father and son left the building that evening, they passed the security desk where a young woman sat, the daughter of a former maintenance worker, now working her way through college thanks to the Stella Foundation. "Mr. Johnson," she called out to both of them. "Thank you for showing us that our dreams don't have to be limited by someone else's prejudices." Marcus squeezed his father's shoulder. "That's your real legacy, Dad, not just changing a company, but changing how people see themselves." Richard smiled, thinking of that day 5 years ago when Maxwell had told him to know his place. He did know it now. Exactly where he belonged, where everyone belonged, wherever their talents and dedication could take them. The story of Stella Enterprises became more than a business case study. It became a blueprint for justice, proving that the most powerful response to prejudice isn't revenge, but success built on dignity, respect, and the understanding that true leadership lifts everyone up.